Welcome to another edition of Tidbits from the Acts of the Apostles. We have reached chapter 18, and Paul, on his missionary journeys, has reached the city of Corinth, the largest, most populated city in the part of the world we today would call Greece. Maybe up to 80,000 people were living there. One of his first tasks was to find people who could work with him, fellow missionaries, and it happened that a married couple, Aquila and Priscilla, often called by her shorter name Prisca, had been thrown out of Rome by the Caesar. It's said that Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. Now, the interesting thing is that this may be an incident that the Roman historian Suetonius mentions in his work about the life of the Caesars. And let me read. He says, as the Jews were making constant disturbances at the instigation of Christus, he expelled them from Rome. This took place in the year 49 AD and is, in that case, a probable hint to the timing of the event. Jews and other groups, by the way, were regularly expelled from Rome, and slowly they managed to get back into Rome again. It was not that difficult. It was not that easy to actually control the flow in and out. The person whose name Christus here may very well be a reference to Christ. That is how much Suetonius, the historian, would know, and in that case it refers to internal struggle in the Jewish community between the Christian Jews and the non-Christian Jews, because after all, the Christian movement was still regarded as a part of Judaism. Now, in his ministry in Corinth, it's told here in verses 7 and 8, he left the synagogue. He had preached there for a while. He left the synagogue because the leaders opposed him, and then he went into a house of a man named Titius Justus, a worshipper of God. His house was next door to the synagogue. Crispus, the ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord together with his entire household, and many of the Corinthians, hearing Paul, believed and were baptized. So even though Paul is thrown out of the synagogue or not allowed to preach there anymore, it doesn't mean that they are not Jewish followers. And his followers could be listed into three categories: Jews, Gentiles who had embraced the Jewish monotheism, that is, the God-fearers, and then finally Gentiles in general from Corinth. Now, Paul travels along. He's leaving Corinth after quite a while there, 1.5 years actually, and then we have a very short turn of events. He's getting back to Jerusalem, and it's told this way in verses 22 and 23, when he had landed in Caesarea, that is Caesarea Maritima along the coastline, he went up and greeted the church, and then he went down to Antioch. The church he greeted was a church in Jerusalem. After spending some time there, that is in Antioch, he departed and went from one place to the next through the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is that if you look at maps over the journeys, the missionary journeys of Paul, you will find the various numbered journeys, first, second, third missionary journey, and this is a transition from the second to the third, and it's evident that this transition doesn't mean nearly as much to Luke as it does to us. It didn't mean as much to those who actually separated the Bible into chapters either. The main point of the third, what we call the third missionary journey, is where he's going. He's going now to Ephesus. Ephesus is a major city, what we would call the capital, the center of what would for us be Western Asia. This is a strategic, very important city. From there he could move into the areas in Asia he had not covered, or he could sail to Greece, to Achaia and the European areas. So to establish a church is important. And actually he had on his trip back to Jerusalem and Antioch, between these two missionary journeys, he had actually left the couple, Aquila and Priscilla, in Ephesus to work. And then happens an important event. There is a disciple whose knowledge is limited, but he is generally well educated. He comes from Alexandria, that is Apollos. He arrives in Ephesus, and it's told that Priscilla and her husband Aquila are teaching him. Interestingly enough, Priscilla, the wife, is now forefronted, and in most references in the New Testament and in the early church, she is forefronted. But in the so-called Western text tradition, it's the Western is wrong, maybe not too good a label, but in some of the major manuscripts of later date, the sequence is reversed. They didn't like the idea that the woman actually should be in front. Nevertheless, Prisca and Aquila are teaching Apollos, who is and would be one of the major evangelists of the early church. So you have here a situation, even in the early church, where a female teacher is teaching a male evangelist. Maybe something to ponder for our time as well. Now, one phrase is my closing note, my closing tidbit. One phrase in this description of their teaching of Apollos is worth considering. Apollos, it says in verse 25, had been instructed in the way of the Lord. Now, when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God. Notice the identification of the way of the Lord, that's the way of Jesus, with the way of God. Jesus the Lord, Kyrios, is regarded as one with God. So when the chapter closes with this statement that he would be showing by scriptures to the Jews that the Christ was Jesus, the notion of this Christ, this Messiah, is a divine figure. Thank you for listening. Welcome back next time to Tidbits from Acts chapter 19.